All right, so I am introducing Ben Eubanks to the stage, and his topic is HR technology market landscape. And he is a near and dear friend. Actually, Ben and I met on Twitter over 10 years ago. So we have watched our families grow up and our own careers. So I'm really excited to have Ben on the stage. Welcome, Ben.
Hey everybody, good to be here. I don't know where the Florida weather is, but I was hoping for it when I got here. Maybe we'll get here by the end of the week by the time we get out of here. Glad to be back. I was here last year, had a chance to share about some of the AI technologies that are in the marketplace, and today it was fun because when I talked to the team about coming back, they said, would you be willing to share some of the research, some of the things you're seeing in the space? And I said, that'd be actually kind of fun. And then throughout the year, I've been kind of tallying things up, keeping tabs on things, and then realized a week ago that we were a week out. And so I pulled all this together so no one else has seen what you're about to see. This is brand new for me, brand new for you, obviously, but I'm going to go through and share some insights from the research that we've done this year, both on the vendor side, the trends we're watching there, as well as on the research practices side, the trend side for us as employers. What are we seeing in terms of buyer behaviors? What are we seeing in terms of reskilling demands? Those kind of things, all right? So it's going to be far-reaching across the entire spectrum as we go through. One of the big things I want you to think of and remember from this conversation is I'm seeing a big push for us to be data-driven, but people-oriented. And it seems like they could be two completely different circles, but they have to come together. If we're just data-driven, we forget about the people behind every data point. If we're just people-oriented, we're soft and squishy, and the business doesn't care what we have to say as HR leaders. I started my career as an HR practitioner and executive, so I understand that very well. You can't go to them with some soft measure and hope that they're going to believe what you have to say or invest in the project you're trying to get across. The story that reminds me that this the best, a couple years ago, we were headed to the hospital. My wife's about to give birth to my son, and so I'm calmly driving at 900 miles an hour to get us there. We get into the hospital, they hook her up to this thing called a tocometer, and that readout you see on the screen there is an actual readout from a tocometer. It measures the strength of contractions. And so as the data nerd, I'm over there watching this intensely, like just amazed by this readout. And behind me I hear her say, whew, that was a rough one. I'm like, well, I'm looking here on the screen. It didn't look like it was that bad, actually. Thankfully, she didn't kill me on the spot. She's a sweet Southern belle. But it's my reminder that behind every data point, behind every metric, is a person, is a human, is a life. Right? And so that's the big thing we're going to come away with, hopefully, from this conversation. We're going to talk about the technology, the data, everything else, but it all comes back to the people that we're working with. So my day job, I run a company called Lighthouse Research and Advisory. We do research on two fronts. On the vendor side, we talk to about 300 companies a year to understand what they're doing, what their capabilities are, who's doing what they say they're doing, which sometimes isn't the same. We also have a research side where we look at the trends and best practices and specifically what high-performing companies are doing differently than everybody else and what can we learn from them. So that's how I spend my days. Wrote a book last year. Tomorrow I've got a couple copies. I'll figure out how to give them away. A couple copies of the book that I wrote last year, Artificial Intelligence for HR. It looks at how AI is woven into and throughout the work that we do as HR leaders. And then I run a podcast called We're Only Human, where I get to talk to talent and HR and learning leaders about what things they're seeing in their business, how they're overcoming challenges, things like that. It's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite things I get to do, because I get to talk to so many really interesting people about what they're dealing with. Really quick, before I go any further, we are about to launch our new report, the 2020 trends. If you want that, you can text this number, text that to 44222. You can get that trend report as soon as it comes out. We'll send it to this list before we post it publicly anywhere. If you sign up, you'll get our current version that we have out there, the 2019 trends. Some of the data that you'll see today around things like market investments and VC spend in the HR technology space are in there, so you'll get some insight on the HR tech side as well as the practices side. So I'll give you just one more second, and boom. Two big things, trends in the landscape, and then some of the research. So we'll dig into both of those in the next 25 minutes or so. And I will be here through tomorrow as well. I have a couple of those meeting slots left. If you hear something interesting today, or you don't hear the thing you want to talk about, grab one of those slots. I have a couple of those already taken, but a couple are still available on the app. So one of the things that I look at as kind of a health indicator for how vibrant the community is in the HR technology space is the amount of money flowing into the industry. Venture capitalists are spending a lot of money, investing a lot of money in the HR technology space, and we'll talk about what they're buying in a little bit. But specifically, in 2017, we looked at the $1 billion that came in and analyzed every single one of those funding rounds and found that about half of those companies are focusing on are AI related. They're building algorithms, they're building chatbots, they're building machine learning tools, things like that to make our HR technology even better, our outcomes even better. Watch this closely though. 2018, 4 times increase, $4 billion, that held at the same 50% or so. It's actually focusing on AI technology. What's interesting is the number already for 2019 is above 4 billion. So the number keeps going up, keeps going higher. We're getting more and more flowing into this space, which is interesting because we're seeing more tools, more technologies, more companies springing up as a result of this. There's a lot of money there, so people want to play in that area and want to bring some new tools to the marketplace to help make the work that we're doing even better, hopefully solve some of the problems that we've been struggling with. So that's fun for me, also challenging to keep tabs on all of them, but we watch that really closely. So some of the things they're buying or they're delivering on. One of the big things we're seeing on the talent acquisition side is a lot of consolidation. For example, you probably saw earlier this year a company called, an investment firm called K1 bought JobVite and Canvas and telemetry and RollPoint, which cover all these different pieces of the TA function, including internal mobility, and rolled them up under one company. They're now going out to the market under the JobVite umbrella, but they rolled all these companies together. This happened a few years ago as well with a company called Symphony Talent. But Symphony actually just purchased Smashfly. So all these things are coming together. We're seeing a lot of consolidation where these firms are bringing these pieces together so that instead of having to deal with 5 vendors or 10 vendors or more to get all of your TA function accomplished, one, hopefully, in the perfect world. It's hard to get to that, but one, hopefully. One of the other things that we're seeing actually, this example, Modern Hire is one of these examples, is a lot of consolidation and changes on the screening and assessment front. So if you follow the news at all, you know that there's a very well-known HR technology company that's being sued right now. They're in litigation because the candidates that are using that tool feel like it's discriminating against them for facial recognition purposes. Okay? That is driving these companies to actually look at other layers to add in that. So it's not just looking at my face and guessing, or listening to my voice and guessing if I'm a good candidate or not, but also they're weaving in assessments, so they have multiple layers to figure out if a candidate is going to be a good fit for a job. So in the last year, we've seen HireVue start building out its own assessments internally. We saw an assessment firm buy WePal, a video interviewing provider, and then Modern Hire is the result of Shaker, a big assessment company, and Montage, a video and voice interviewing company, coming together. So it's one of the big trends we're seeing is these companies that are doing that automated interviewing piece, getting away from just judging a candidate based on their voice or their face and things like that, but trying to weave in this assessment layer so they have additional data to figure out who's the right hire. You know why that is? Because they see the video interview and it looks like this guy, but when they come to work, it's actually this guy. And that's a struggle for employers. That's a struggle to be seen as credible with the rest of the business if you're a TA leader. I sat down in Chicago this week with the head of TA from a couple of firms here in the US with 10,000 or more employees, and we were talking about the struggles they have with identifying the right candidates. And this is kind of humorous, right? But it ultimately boils down to that on many levels. We get these small, bad hires that ultimately add up to a big cost to the organization. A lot of turnover, a lot of impact down the line on our credibility with the rest of the business, either on the hiring manager side or on the executive side, because we can't figure out which ones are the right ones. Shifting away from TA a little bit, one of the other areas that I follow really closely is this area of talent mobility, finding the right talent inside the business. It's funny because I was at a conference this fall, got to sit down with the heads of TA from 10 different companies here in the US, from the largest employers in the country, and I was there to talk about digital disruption, hiring, and all they wanted to talk about was talent mobility. And that was an eye-opener for me. I already loved the topic, but they want to talk about this in the context of how can we hire for the right skills? Not just someone's ability to ace an interview, but how can we really value them on the skills they have and use that as the currency, not just for their job today, but for slotting them into a job in the future as well. They're thinking ahead beyond just hiring for that immediate need and thinking down the line, how can I slot this person in and help them, guide them, shepherd them into a position that not only benefits them, touches on those things they want to do and want to be, but also touches on things we need as an employer to solve our own challenges, needs, fill those gaps. Big focus on the skills piece. And one of the conversations that I love having is around learning. You don't hear that very often probably, but I love having the conversation around learning because I talk to employers that are saying, hey, we're trying to find a new tool, a new technology. We're trying to get better at learning. We just want our people to take more learning. We need to get them more courses, more content. And I always remind them that the goal of learning isn't learning. The goal of learning is performance. Am I right? Right. I'm just assuming. I can't see anything with the bright lights. I'll assume everybody's nodding like vigorously. Yes, absolutely. The goal of learning isn't learning. The goal of learning is performance. So how can we get to that actual measurement of a skill output, of some sort of measurable behavior or objective that they're getting to beyond that? Experience is a big part of this. Like the experience we had a few minutes ago, I want to ask you to hug anybody, all right? But experience is a key part of how we are now seeing everything under the umbrella of what we do, both on the outside perspective for candidates, as well as inside. How we're developing talent experiences for our internal candidates, how we're developing learning experiences around them, how the overall employee experience is crafted to make sure it's tailored and personalized so that everyone feels like this is fit for me. Just like things are fit for them in their own personal lives outside of work, how can we tailor that around them so that they feel like this is designed and connected to those things they care most about as an employee? All right, shift gears a little bit. So we do a lot of research. We do a lot of studies. We dig into what's happening, both on the quantitative side. We survey a lot of employers, but we also do a lot of qualitative conversations as well. We talk to a lot of employers, understanding what's going on, what their challenges are, things like that, to dig deeper and get the why behind some of the survey findings we get. So I'm going to share with you, again, across the spectrum, some of the things that we've learned this year. Some of them surprised me, honestly. I'll tell you which ones. And I'll also highlight a couple things that separate the high performers from everybody else. All right. So we did a study on the business value of HR technology. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm doing survey work is I love surveying HR and talent leaders. I want to hear what we think about the world. Our perspective matters. But I also love surveying the people around them, whether it's surveying the employees to see what they think, or in this case, we actually surveyed business leaders outside of HR to find out how they view us and our investments in technology. And what's interesting is in that study, we found that the people that work outside of HR were more likely to say that the tools that we're using, the tools we're buying, the tools we're implementing and using every single day are a strategic value for the business. HR leaders are more likely to say it's just kind of a way to automate some things, get it off our plate so we don't have to do it anymore. That was very interesting because you would assume, and I assumed, that we would be more likely to think it's a strategic investment, a strategic way to get our job done. But the business leaders outside of that thought that more often. One of the other things we saw is if you had more recently implemented a piece of technology within the last 2 years was the window that we asked about. So if you had implemented technology in the last 2 years, you were twice as likely to see it as strategic as someone that had implemented farther back. On top of that, if you more recently implemented technology, you saw a ton of benefits. I couldn't fit them all here, but some of them were better productivity, better insight into the business, better reporting, better data, all those good benefits, all those things that we want out of our tools and our technologies. If we could snap our fingers and just make it work, make the tools work that we have today, we'd want those kind of outcomes. So it was a good reminder for me that the tools we're putting in place, they're getting better every day. If you're more recently implemented, you're more likely to see those kind of benefits than if you're struggling with an older system that's not able to just meet your needs and solve your problems. Skip that one. One of the other things that we dug into this year was this idea of augmented insights. So I don't know who was here last year, there might be a couple of you, but one of the things I talked about from an AI perspective is the value I see in AI technology is not that it can automate things for us. That is good, but it's not the only value point. If anybody in here is still manually writing paychecks, we'll come give you a hug because that's terrible, okay? I don't think anybody is, but if you were, we'd come give you a hug. We're not, okay? We're using these tools to automate the stuff we're already doing. So automation in itself can't be the only value point. So why can't we augment the things that we are good at with the things that technologies are good at to get the best results? There's lots of examples of this all through the world of work. For example, there's a study I wrote about in the book where cancer researchers were digging in. They had doctors go through and analyze cells for cancer, and the doctors were at 94% accurate. Then they let an algorithm run at it, and it was about 92% accurate. So it seemed like the doctors are better, right? But when they put them together and had the algorithm go first and the doctors come in and double check, they were more than 99% accurate. So how can we get the best of both worlds? Because we both bring different strengths to the table. So this research, we actually did a really interesting experiment. We actually surveyed 1,000 North American workers to create a data set of like an employee base of 1,000 people. And we took that data to a handful of consulting firms and said, look at this data as if we were an employer and tell us what's going on. So the questions we asked were the same kind of questions you'd ask in an engagement survey or satisfaction survey. How happy are you with your manager relationship on a scale of 1 to 5? And then we asked them after that an open-ended question. Tell me about that relationship with your manager, so we could get some open-ended text. So in this survey data set, we actually had 10,000 words of open text. We sent that off, let the consultants kind of deal with it, tell us what they could find. We got a couple of insights back, but nothing really earth-shattering, nothing really groundbreaking. The closest thing I got was kind of a word cloud that said, hey, these are some big picture things you might need to think about. But they didn't tell us if those were issues or there were problems, they were happy with them. It just said managers. The data behind it could have said managers are great. It could have said managers are terrible. We all know probably which one it was, but there was no way to tell that just in the word cloud. So we actually ran that data through an algorithm that looked at the natural language behind it for emotion and sentiment and mood, and came out with this really interesting set of insights. I couldn't show all of them here. Actually just announced this data about a month ago and released all of this in a report. So one of the slides from that is here. We looked at what sort of things stress you out at work. They prevent you from being your best self and being most productive. And so we pulled that out of this survey data set, and you can see the things you'd expect to see, probably, right? The workload, micromanagement, family issues, all these things kind of break down and get some insight there. But what's interesting is we then took this and could break it down by the job function you had, where you were located, if you had kids or not, what your income was. We could look at this data through all these different layers to figure out if one of those was more likely to be associated with a group or not. The thing that I came away with from this study, one of the big takeaways that I had, is that average is a math term. It's not a human term. We think, 70% of our employees are X. But when you say that, you're automatically bucketing people, and you're eliminating this kind of insight that you can get around them that's very nuanced and very specific and very particular. Let me give you an example of that. So back in the 50s, the U.S. Air Force was flying a lot of planes. They were getting faster, they were getting better, but they were also crashing more often, even though they had more safety features than ever. Well, they wanted to know why. So the Air Force came to the pilots and said, well, it's a mechanical error. They went to the mechanics and said, no, it's pilot error. And so they're trying to figure this out. So they actually went through and they measured the pilots, all of them, things like the circumference of their neck, or their arm length, or how long their thumbs were, or how big their feet were. They measured all these characteristics about them to see what the average pilot was, to see if that was the problem, if they no longer fit the cockpit. So they got an average number across more than 140 metrics for 3,000 pilots. One of those researchers said, I'm wondering how many of our pilots are actually average? Out of these thousands of pilots we have, how many of them hit average on all those marks? You want to know how many hit average on all those marks? 0. Not a single one. So we said, okay, I'll back it down to just 10 metrics. 10 metrics. How many of them are average? Still 0 on 10 different metrics. When you backed it down to 3, your neck circumference, your shoe size, and the length of your arm, 2.5% of them were average. But that was just for 3 characteristics. And that is a big reminder for me for looking at that as if it was an employee data set, and we're trying to figure out how to solve the problems our employees need us to solve and how to target the issues that they have. We can't just look at big picture, 70% of people said this, 20% of people said that, because that doesn't get us down to the level where we can take action on those things. It's an example of augmentation because AI can do this analysis much better than we can, but it can't solve the problems. We've still got to go in there and take action and actually make the steps to make that right. Speaking of AI, we just did a study about 2 weeks ago, talked to employers that have 5,000 or more employees, and we asked them about how well they understood AI applications in our space, in the talent space. What's interesting here, the top section is for low performers. So we break our data out into high performing, low performing. If you have better than average revenue increases, if you have higher retention rates, you have higher engagement rates, you are bucketed into a high performing slot. We see if there's anything different between those groups. And as you can see here, the high performers are on the bottom, much more likely, 40% more likely to say they fully understand how AI can be applied to their talent problems and help them solve those things. Does that make them a high performer? I don't have enough data to prove that. This is just correlation. But it's not a bad thing, for sure. The more insight you have, the more you can understand how to apply that to the problems that you are facing every single day from a talent perspective. One of the other things from that study we found that was really surprising for me was that how we even view AI as a tool affects our priorities, the decisions we make. So we asked a question, does the talent acquisition leader of tomorrow, basically of the next year, does the talent acquisition leader of the next year need to get better at understanding and speaking in terms of data? They need to be more tech savvy. They need to have more insight into how to align strategically with the business. And I was completely surprised to see that the results came back about 50-50. Some people said yes, some people said no. And that really surprised me, because I would have assumed that we would think it was much more heavily on the yes side. We need these things. We need to get better at these things. So what I did was broke the data out by those that understood AI and those that did not. And you can probably guess what happened then. Those that understood it and how it could be applied, it went off the charts in terms of, yes, we need to get better at these things, because if AI can do its job and we can do our job, we can get better results than we ever have before. That surprised me. This was also fun for me. So for the last 6 to 12 months, I've had a fake chart when I talk about AI for HR and the applications in talent acquisition, because I did not have this data yet. I just anecdotally, from talking to candidates and talking to employers, knew that very early in the process, someone hits your career site, they are fine and we are fine as business leaders with that being automated totally. Chatbot, AI, something else handling that process. But the closer we get to someone getting an offer in their hand and saying, I want to join your company, or I want you to join our company, the more likely we want a human in the loop somewhere so we make sure that we're making the right choice there. We don't want to just hand that off to an algorithm and hope for the best. So I've had a chart in there for a long time that backed that up, but it was all just my own perceptions on the world and all the anecdotal. So we actually just gathered this data, and this shows the rankings of how comfortable we are. So at the very bottom, we see things like scheduling, and you can ask your team if you're not scheduling anymore, you can ask your team, none of them love it. Okay? I still have like flashbacks and cold sweats thinking about the times I had to schedule interviews and spend all that time doing that. That's not something that anybody looks forward to. Right? The early sourcing and screening, all those basic pieces of it, they're fairly robotic in nature anyway. Let's hand that off to an algorithm and let the recruiter spend their time doing the things that actually do add value to the process, like selecting the right one, like going through a really in-depth interview and having a good conversation with someone to figure out if they actually fit our culture. Wow, how about that? So really interesting. I love that data set. It's been a lot of fun to dig into that and find some of the things. Again, haven't shared those anywhere else, and excited to get that data published, because that's going to be a lot of fun to see what kind of conversations that starts. One of the pieces of research we did very early this year, we dug into this idea of reskilling, because I keep hearing it in the news all the time, and I wanted to understand from people like yourself, is this really a challenge? Is this really a trend? Or is this just something where someone is jumping on the bandwagon, throwing their budget numbers out there, saying, we're going to reskill for $2 million a year just so that people want to look at us, and if we use the PR move. And what we found is, no, that's not the case. Almost all of us, 4 out of 5 of us, are worried about this to some degree. We think it's going to change the skills that we need in our business. It's going to drive all these changes. And within that study, I found a lot of interesting data points about how we can find the talent both within our business and outside. One of the stats that we ran across was 70%. So this is an example. We surveyed talent leaders and we surveyed employees themselves, the learners, to understand how they feel about the world, how they perceive the world. And what we found is 70% of them have left a job because they didn't see a career path ahead of them at their company. However, 95% of them said, I would have stuck around if I knew what my next step was, if I knew what was ahead of me, if I had some sort of vision of what my career could look like in the future. That's not a promise, that's not a guarantee, but at least some sort of idea of what is next for me. So that was a really interesting one to dig into. One of the other findings in that, we published this with ATD, was we asked them how they want to learn. Because again, going to learning the comment before, we've seen a shift in the last few years towards get more content in front of people. If we give them an access to a library of 10,000 courses, we can check the block and move on as a learning leader, as an HR leader, and that is not the case. That was very far down the list in terms of what both we said was going to be effective for reskilling, as well as what the employees said they wanted from us in terms of reskilling. They want coaching, they want mentoring, they want experiential learning, they want these opportunities to test and try, maybe fail, non-fatal failures, but they want to learn that way. They don't want to, if I said tomorrow your job was going away and you were going to become a software developer, here's a course, none of us would be able to pull that one off. But we think courses are the way to solve some of these problems, maybe for upskilling, but definitely not for reskilling. That was my big takeaway there. So we talked about, it might seem a little scatterbrained, all over the place, all the things that are probably on my agenda for the coming year. Some of them might align with you, but so many things happening in the marketplace today. I tried to encapsulate them the best I could in the last 20, 25 minutes or so. Walk away with this. All the things we talked about, if you had to bundle them together, we need to get better at the data. We need to get better at understanding what's going on there. We need to get better at managing the systems and the tools that we have, picking the right ones to make sure they're enabling us to perform better. But we also have to remember we've got to be oriented towards the people. Your employees, your people that work for you are worried. They're reading the headlines that say all of us are going to be unemployed in 10 years. I don't believe those, but they might. And they might not know what to do. So employers that are having those conversations, even if it's we don't know what's happening, but we're paying attention to this and we'll keep you in the loop, even that is enough to comfort them, to know that you are looking out for them, that you're caring about them, that you're focused on their future with your firm and not just closing your eyes and hoping for the best. If you want the research, if you want any of the studies that I mentioned today, you want to dig deeper, happy to share those with you. And again, I mentioned it earlier, I have a few slots open tomorrow. If you want to grab some time, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Open book, and I'll have, again, I mentioned earlier, I have some books that I'll make sure and get to the guys so we can share a couple of those out tomorrow, find some way to give them away as prizes or whatever else, whoever wants to get those. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Ben before you leave? Questions?
5 minutes left. Anything you want to know about while I'm here?
Yeah,
sure.
1 second, please.
What's the best place to start with AI?
Yep.
What is your problem? That's the best place to start.
There's so many, but if we just start with some of the basic employee questions and answers, where do I find things? How do I take PTO?
Socrates is here. Have a conversation with them. That's an example of one of the tools that's in the market today to help solve those kind of problems. If you want to start with a low-hanging fruit like that, there's actually a company I spoke with about a year ago. I asked them, okay, let's say someone does buy this tool for automating some of those employee self-service kind of questions, right? They said within 2 months of being on board and working with them and having it learn kind of your verbiage and your policies, everything else, 80% of those incoming requests can be automated. So that guy that just can't seem to figure out how to update his 401k deferral for the 15th time this year, and he keeps asking, I remember him well. Like those kind of questions are not a value add for your team. And some people say, I had a conversation this week with a gentleman who said, we just implemented a new service tool for HR service delivery. He said, our employees feel like we're keeping an arm's length. But I said, when they have a real need, a real question, a real problem, you can have that conversation with them as long as you're not bogged down in all these other details about how do I update my address or what's our policy for this. If they need to go deeper, they can have a conversation, but that's the easy way to have a start. Yes, ma'am?
Hi, my name is Ganesh from Dotton. You shared a chart which was about comfort with algorithms. You
Yes, sir.
shared some data about selecting and screening. What's the difference?
So screening is the very earliest conversation you're going to have, typically like a phone screen, where you're going to get some basic insight into the candidate and figure out do they move on or not. Selection is actually, again, I've picked you, I'm going to make you an offer, Ganesh, and see if you want to come work for us. That's a different part of the process. Does that help? Yes, sir.
Klaus Unger from Mayo Clinic. Whenever I hear AI, I kind of crunch a little bit because most of all these things are just based on machine learning because there's no really true eye in most of the technologies, right? I don't know if you agree or not.
We can have a long conversation about this.
Yeah, I think we will. Because even in assessments and selection, it's all based on data and profiles and things like that. So I think we probably need a little bit more time to do that. But when I hear AI, it suggests there's more in the technology that's actually out there.
So the AI that I'm talking about, very narrowly defined, it can solve very specific parts of a problem. For example, again, there's another vendor here, Vervo. If you haven't had a conversation with them, go check them out. One of the things that their tool can do is build an assessment immediately based on the job you put in. So if you don't have an assessment for a customer service person, you start typing the job, and it will start immediately creating this for you automatically based on all the science they have behind which assessments are validated and predictive and which ones are not. I'm with you. None of these are going to just do the process for us. I want that big red button. One of the fun things I always do, and we ran out of time today to do it, but I always ask, if you had a red button to automate a part of your job that you don't want to do anymore, what would it do? Because it's fun to hear from all of us about what things we wouldn't want to do anymore. Some of those things can be done today. The scheduling, some of the other stuff is completely handled. Other things are a little farther off, and some of them we don't actually want an algorithm to do. If some people say hiring, I just want it to be done. And I challenged them on that because if I told you you could push a button and someone would show up at your office tomorrow, we're not sure we're ready for those kinds of things. But that's a good question, good observation.
Thank you very much, Ben.